and welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Garth Neufeld, along with Eric Landrum, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center on conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the and stuff. This is episode number 120, where Eric had the opportunity to interview Jess Hartnett from Gannon University in Erie, Pennsylvania. But before we get to that, Psych Sessions is sponsored by Macmillan Learning. At Macmillan Learning, psychology content matters, and no Macmillan author exemplifies that more than Dave Myers, the world's best-selling psychology textbook author. From his engaging Talk Psych blog to the meticulous updating process he follows edition after edition, Myers is the master at making psychological science relevant and accessible. And when it comes to addressing vital issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and reaching out to students of all backgrounds, he is truly a groundbreaker. Macmillan Learning Psychology, where content matters, especially when authors like Dave Myers connect that content to the real lives of all kinds of students. To find out more, please visit macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions. If you have not yet had a chance to rate Psych Sessions on iTunes, we invite you to go there right now and leave a rating, as this helps people find us and will help Psych Sessions get out to more teachers of psychology. So please, pause this episode right now, go there, come back, we'll be waiting. And thanks. Now, before you hear the interview with Jess Hartnett, please allow me to share some listening tips and some of my favorite moments. Yes, folks, this is Jess Hartnett of Twitter fame and blog fame and statistics fame. And I was remarking to Eric via text message that this was just such a great episode. There's such a good rapport with these two from the beginning. And that's hard to pull off, actually, in a podcast. We sometimes joke about the comfort really not settling in until about 20 minutes in. So, you could fast forward through the first 20 minutes of really any podcast where strangers are meeting each other, having their first conversation. But really, they fast-track the rapport here, which is great. There are, as you would expect, some statistics teaching gems in here. You want it, you got it. So we get to hear kind of behind the scenes what day-to-day teaching looks like for Jess, from a 7-week accelerated online stats course to an honors course with only 13 students in it. And I found that really fascinating. And there are some unique things about Gannon University that Eric highlights for us and brings up to Jess, and I thought that was really an interesting conversation. All right, there is a Northern Illinois connection here between Eric and Jess that they stumble into. Eric grew up in Northern Illinois, Jess went to Northern Illinois, and so there's lots of love for Illinois for all you Illinoisans out there. So her background is social psych with a sprinkle of IO, which I would not have thought of, but now makes a lot of sense. So there's some hindsight bias for you. Now, Eric and Jess talk about conferences. They record this back in February, and let's just think back a few months, folks, because a few months ago, back in February, things were really different than they are right now. And so as they were talking about when conferences might start face-to-face again and having conversations related to those decisions, the world is a little bit of a different place right now for some of us. And so it's interesting just to think back on where we were. Now, lots of you are thinking to yourself, did they talk about the blog? Of course they talked about the blog, which is the best named blog I think that I have read in education, which is Not Awful and Boring Examples for Teaching Statistics. Jess started this blog in 2012, so she's coming up to 10 years with it, and with over 400,000 views. And this started small, and they talk about starting something small, and I love it. A creative process, starting something small, a little out of the box. As Eric talked about, sharing what we're doing in our classes broadly and publicly can turn into something really, really good. And in Jess's case, it has, because of all the time and effort and expertise that she has shared with us. Jess talks about how she has used the blog for purposes of tenure and promotion, which Eric and I are fairly passionate about, looking at non-traditional means and contributions to a scholarship. And if there is one hint that I would pull and give to you from Jess's reflections on how she did this at her institution, tell people what they want and what they're looking for before they ask for it. Be prepared so that you can disarm some more traditional views of scholarship by talking about impact. Jess is going to write a stats textbook and is already involved in that because why not? Of course she should. She talks about the way that stat textbooks are typically written and how she wants to do something a little bit different and make it funny and engaging and a book that students will actually read, which I love, but some reviewers don't love, which was interesting to think about. All right. These two nerd out on stats. I'm not a stats head, so when they talk about p-values and probabilities and more confusing things that I'm not going to relate into this introduction, I don't think I glazed over, but it was just fun to listen to them talk about these things. Now, what I do appreciate about both of them is that they want to make stats practical and engaging for students, and that was a nice conversation. They want to also make stats about real life. And so how do you take stats and make sure that it is applicable to student lives? Well, they're going to cover that as well. Jess is the current chair for the STP Presidential Task Force on Statistical Literacy across the curriculum, the psychology curriculum, but also specifically in intro psych. So I've had the pleasure of working with Jess this year as I am heading up that introductory psychology piece of that larger two-part task force. And Jess has been an absolute pleasure to work with. And you know what I've noticed in those meetings is that when Jess has an idea, first of all, she is so kind with the way that she offers her expertise and her ideas and guides the ship, but also people really respect her and really listen. I know I do. So, I love the end of their conversation. It's the you never know conversation. You never know where something's going to lead. You never know where following a creative instinct is going to lead or how it's going to pay off for you professionally later. And guess what? Most of the time, it probably doesn't. At least not in terms of, psychology fame. So, but you never know. You never know. So it's a really nice story. I actually think that you should follow your creative impulses because thinking outside of the box and filling gaps, not only in the research, but the way that we deliver our product to teachers and students, but also in targeting those audiences. Those are really good questions to consider as we are looking to make our contribution to the teaching of psychology. So here they are, Jess Hartnett with Eric Landrum.
I am so thrilled today to be talking to Jess Hartnett from Gannon University on the Psych Sessions podcast. Hi, Jess.
Hello, it's nice to be here.
Oh, it's so nice to be able to chat with you, and thank you for making time today to talk to us and to our listeners. There's so many things I want to talk to you about, so I appreciate your time today.
Sure.
In our conversations back and forth via email to set this up, you happened to mention that I think it was a couple of weeks ago that you weren't feeling well, or maybe your kids weren't feeling well, and I got the sense that maybe you were doing some homeschooling during COVID. Is that
Yeah.
a fair assumption?
It was. My kids were very lucky to go to a private school that's been able to deal with COVID and remaining face-to-face. But they did have an illness in the class, and everyone was sent home for 2 weeks. So
And we don't have to go here if you don't want to, but we're having this conversation in February of 2021,
mhm.
and podcasters aren't supposed to date stuff, and I don't really care. But could you talk a little bit about the challenges that it's been to be an educator in your college classroom and a parent and then an educator in your child's lives.
It's terrible sometimes. It can be really challenging of trying to keep up with my Zoom meetings and my son's Zoom meetings. We are fortunate. So my husband teaches philosophy at Gannon University,
Okay.
and our chairs worked with us, so we do not have overlapping teaching schedules. So there have been days where I go run downstairs at 6 a.m. and I get some work done while my husband takes care of the boys. Then I have my 8 o'clock class and my 9 o'clock class. Then I come up and I handle homeschooling for the children for the rest of the day while my husband does what I had just been doing.
Wow.
And yeah, and so I mean, it's really hard, but I'm still perfectly aware of how fortunate we are. So I can't imagine how triple hard it must be for single parents or parents whose employers aren't as understanding as mine is.
Yeah, I think we haven't grasped yet, maybe as
No.
a discipline or as a as an as an organizational kind of uh, you know higher ed as an institution, we haven't grasped yet. We're not very nimble. We don't pivot well in terms of providing our employees support. And even at Boise State, we're now just kind of figuring out how do we do workload adjustments. How do we not penalize tenure track faculty for not being able to do research? And so if you're at home doing extra parenting and you're doing your teaching and research, we can't penalize tenure track faculty for not being able to be productive researchers during a pandemic. And good for you that you have a chair that's been able to be accommodating and not double booking you at the same time. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's a small enough university where everyone's communicating with each other. So we're very grateful in those regards. And I'm also just grateful that I'm tenured. I couldn't imagine the constant worry that, I mean, my research is very minimal right now, and I don't need to worry about my job.
Right. I mean, and that's I think the blessing of tenure is that we have that security that many people out of the industry of higher ed don't have. Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that, and I guess that was just kind of top of mind from our emails back and forth. So I appreciate that. We were just chatting just before we before I hit the record button, that you had done some teaching earlier today as we speak. Tell me about what you're teaching this semester.
So on campus, I'm teaching honor stats, which is a really nice, I think we have 13 students in that class. And because it's the honor stats, we get a little bit into bigger questions of data and research and statistical ethics as they apply to modern life. We talk some about data being collected from us at all times and how that data is being translated into machine learning in order to make big, important choices. But those are just going to bake in prejudice, and the students really get into those conversations. The director of the honors college here, Ann Baumberger, is really good at teaching these students that they must be active in the classroom and talk a lot in the classroom and embrace the fact that they're at a liberal arts university and everything's interconnected. So that's a fun group of people to teach with. This semester, I'm also teaching IO psychology, which I think is just such an important topic and such an important elective for the students to take because it's underrepresented in intro psych. And I've had so many students' eyes light up when they realize, you mean I can like psychology but not be a professor or a counselor and still get a job? Mm-hmm. That's the reaction a lot of the times. And then I'm teaching online stats as well, which is super challenging because it's a condensed 7-week course.
Wow.
Yeah, the grades are a bit bimodal in there, where you have some students that are going to step up and handle the responsibility, right, and other students who, no matter how many times I tell them, no, you can't pass this class by working for 4 hours on it every Saturday, they still want to do that. Yeah, it can be challenging.
And in a 15-week semester, many students can do the Saturday 4-hour success rate.
Yeah, well, they could work with it a little bit if they keep up with the lectures too. But with that condensed class, it can really be very difficult on students.
So you mentioned that Gannon is liberal arts. Can you tell us a little bit about, the size? Is it religious affiliated? Tell us a little bit about your
There's
university.
3,000 undergraduates. We have a few doctoral programs, in particular, like pre-medical professionals, like we have a PT, a doctorate of PT, and I know, yeah, and we have an MA physician assistant. I believe that's the terminal degree for that field. We have nursing, bachelor's, master's, doctorate, I believe, OT as well. And I actually teach, my stats class counts across the university. So I teach a lot of those students. We are religiously affiliated. We are affiliated with the Catholic Diocese of Erie.
Oh, okay.
So that's, I think there's only 4 or 5 schools that are modeled like that, where they're kind of affiliated with the diocese that way. And yesterday was Ash Wednesday, so they had pierogies on campus. So that was great. I will take my Catholics of Western Pennsylvania with dishing out the pierogies on Ash Wednesday. And it's a nice, snug little place. We know all of the psych majors. The psych majors know us. We have a thriving population of psych minors as well. It's a really nice place to work.
And so is the, a lot of religiously affiliated schools, it's kind of a tradition from the past that's fallen off. Is it an active, palpable, positive influence, or is it kind of just by name only and it's an affiliation and that's pretty much it?
It's more than by name only.
Okay.
I'm just thinking now, every Thursday at 11 a.m. there's a mass, and traditionally there's no classes taught at that time. However, it's a pretty inclusive community at the same time. The efforts on campus to kind of bring students and talk about spirituality are largely through service learning, service trips, things like that. So that's the big part of how the Catholic identity lives out here at Gannon, with a big emphasis on service in the community, international service, things like that. There's several priests on faculty. I think we might have a nun or 2 on faculty still. Those numbers proportionally were a lot higher in the past than they are now.
Sure.
Yeah, I would say that it's more than just in name only, that the Catholic identity is pretty strong here.
Yeah, my undergraduate was Presbyterian affiliated, and by the time I was there, I think they were minor donors, but that really wasn't palpable. Although we had a weekly convocation, that was about it, and we had some religious classes you could take, a religion department, but that was about it. And I'm curious because I think it can be an incredibly powerful and positive experience. So.
And now that you say that, we do have a liberal core, and all of our students right now are required to take 3 theology classes, although that core might be changing.
Sure, of course. So so IO psychology, is that your training and background?
So I got my PhD from Northern Illinois University, and there
You did?
I did.
You went to DeKalb.
I know of the corn. Yes,
I grew up in northern Illinois. I grew up in Lake County. Yeah, Lake County and Grays Lake.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been to the NIU campus many times.
I miss it a lot. I had a really good time out there. And there, the Iowan social psych specialty areas at the graduate level are combined, such that you are a social IO, like you're a member of that branch of the department. But if you're more socially oriented, like I was, you take more social classes. If you're IO oriented, you take more IO classes. And of course, that's going to kind of shape the content of your thesis and dissertation. So I had a number of IO classes. I did a little bit of IO consulting work when I was in graduate school. I'd still consider myself more of a social psychologist, but I have enough background to definitely teach IO.
So what was your I don't know if I want to call it your home conference, but was your initial conference induction or initiation Midwestern Psychological Association?
It was. And MPA is terrific.
Yeah, mine too.
Uh-huh.
For graduate school, I went to Southern Illinois University
Oh,
in
okay.
Carbondale. But I had all kinds of friends from high school who went to NIU, who I would visit on that campus a number of times. And I actually had friends at Western Illinois as well. So, um,
Gotcha.
yeah. Yeah, and anyone who's been to WPA at the Palmer House always speaks glowingly, like you reacted just then.
It's a really good place to kind of cut your teeth as an undergraduate or a graduate student, but the Midwest has such a strong social psych tradition that you always get these top-notch speakers there for,
Yes.
only a regional conference. And it's always also, it's at like, late April, early May. So it's almost like at graduate school level, it was like that was part of the end of the school year celebration that MPA was coming, and NIU would like put you up in Chicago for a couple of nights.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. The social psych program there, even as a grad student and a new faculty member, I mean, social psych's not my area, but I recognized, the Richard Pettys of the world and
Yes.
all those folks in that area. I would recognize actually the world-class names in social psych from the Ohio States, from the Michigans, from all of those Midwest, Iowa, Illinois, all those folks, converging on MPA. It was really, um, I think from what I'm told, one of the places to go if you were a social psychologist.
Agreed. It was a great conference. I hope to get back there at some point.
Did you grow up in Illinois?
No. Okay. So I'm an Air Force brat. So I was born on Guam, but we didn't stay there all that long because Air Force. And then we
Okay.
ended up in Omaha, Nebraska and Dayton, Ohio. Then my dad had two tours, one right after another at the Pentagon and then Bolling Air Force Base in DC. And then I turned 12 and my dad retired to Altoona, Pennsylvania, which is where I spent like junior high school.
Do you have any memories of Guam at all, or just no? Yeah.
None at all. My parents do, and my older sister can remember it. The joke there is because my parents moved from North Dakota to Guam because Air Force.
Sure.
And my sister was born in North Dakota, and my mom always tells the story that like she was doing some preschool project on Guam and they're cutting out mittens out of construction paper. And my sister's like, "What's a mitten? Why would you ever need a mitten?" Because all she knew at that point was Guam. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I was a Navy brat, but
Oh yeah.
I came along at the end of my father's naval career. So Pensacola, Florida, Alameda, California, to Great Lakes, Illinois, and Illinois is my connection to where he retired after his
That makes
last
sense.
post.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. So was that the kind of military bouncing around, was that a positive experience for you? Did you kind of gain those skills to be able to be adaptive and thrive in any environment? And the new school from what you described, every few years, it was a new school, new environment.
I think it was nice because as an adult, I never had any expectations of staying in the same town I had grown up in.
Hmm.
And I think that can be crushing for some people in academics who really want to stay put. And it also kind of established the norm that like there's no guilt from my parents for moving around. My siblings have all moved around.
Interesting.
Which is also sometimes stressful for people in academics where your relatives and your parents don't know why you can't just get a job at the university down the street. And so it was nice that as an adult I didn't have expectations for sticking around and my parents didn't have any expectations. And I remember actually after my dad retired and we moved to like outside of Altoona, and like I was talking to people like, "Oh, we've lived in Altoona our whole life. Our grandparents are from Altoona." I'm like, "What is this? You don't drive like 5 hours to Philly to see your grandparents? What's going on?" Yeah.
Right. Yeah. 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 Staying in the same place seemed odd to you and your family.
Yeah.
It's almost like I mean, I know you didn't mean it this way. It's almost like, what's wrong with you? I mean,
Right.
well, why would you do such a thing? It's kind of like I've heard a comedian have the gag, when they hear that, a couple's been married 30, 35 years. A comedian has this line that goes, uh, really? What's wrong? Didn't you know you could get out of it? Because being married that long is kind of the outlier these days in many ways. Um, okay, all right. So you mentioned a sister in there. So just one sibling?
I have an older sister and a younger brother, and the younger brother went into the Air Force, so he's down in Florida right now.
Okay, so here we go. The middle child. Okay.
Yeah. Pay
Okay.
attention to me.
So, so if you don't mind, and we can go elsewhere. What are the age gaps?
75, 79, 82. So like 3 to 4 year age gap for all of
Okay.
us.
Okay. Um, and so since you were a military family moving a lot, did you band together and kind of, all for one for all, or not so much?
Somewhat. I mean, we're in contact. We're not super tight right now, but we're in contact. We have our own little family Facebook group and Facebook DMs back and forth, trying to figure things out, and stay in touch. That's been especially. I mean, it kind of comes and goes with the closeness. My brother deployed to Afghanistan twice, and during those
Wow.
times, like there's tons of emails and tons of messages back and forth. And family wide trying to contact and get in touch with each other. And actually, right before the pandemic, the Thanksgiving before everything hit the fan, we all went to Disney together and stayed at the one resort that it's called Shades of Green, I think, and it's like a resort just for people in the military and their guests.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we
Oh, how
got to
cool.
like go on a big with all. There's now 4 grandkids, and my sister, my brother were there. My parents were able to make it down there, and that was really nice.
Well, and Jess, I've had similar reflections. How cool was it that you did that first off, but then even now doubly how you appreciate that you did that before March of 2020.
Right? There's a lot of those moments, right? Like NITOP 2020. Yeah.
Right. Conferences APA 2019. I
And
mean, just
SPSP was like right before everything hit the fan.
right, exactly. And I I think about, when will I go to a conference again? And
Yeah.
it's, I would love to see my friends, but I'm not so sure about things like being in a hotel or being on an airplane. And I really think back and revere and cherish, those conference experiences. You coming out to APS and being one of our speakers. I mean those experiences. I I didn't appreciate them as much as I should have, and upon reflection, I appreciate them more.
Absolutely. And I'm right there with you where being at a conference is one thing, but taking connecting flights through like every airport, like to get out of Erie, especially, like that's just a whole lot of exposure. And well, you're the same way. I'm sure that there's not a lot of, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, Boise, you can go to Chicago nonstop and you can go to San Francisco nonstop. But if you're going to, I think ACT was going to be in Pittsburgh, for
Yep.
example. It would take at least 2 flights for me to get to Pittsburgh.
Right.
Depending on the airline, that might be three. And as much as I would dearly love to see so many people at ACT, um, you know, I, it's hard to know if we're going to be back to normal in 2022. Is it going to be 2023?
Right. Right.
It's really hard to know. It's really
Uh-huh.
hard to know that. So I have to talk to you about something, a gift that you give. There is a tremendous gift that you give, and I want to talk to you about how you started it and how much time it takes you and what was the impetus. And I have it up on my another screen because I want to get the wording just right. You have a blog that
Hmm.
if it's not world famous, it's nationally famous. And the title of it is Not Awful and Boring Examples for Teaching Statistics.
That's
Uh,
me.
and it, just for listeners who aren't familiar with it, uh, it is amazing.
Thank
When I
you.
say it's a gift, I mean that sincerely. It is rich. It is thoughtful. It is funny. It is poignant. It's not actually even all about statistics. Sometimes, usually, there's a statistics theme behind the one, two, or three things that you post within each blog, but you have posted ideas there about teaching tips for connecting with your students,
Hmm.
grading tips, I'm going to ramble about a couple of them that I really loved. One was about taking attendance. You mentioned an app. You mentioned an app that you used one semester to stay in touch. I think right at the beginning of the pandemic, and the one that I just went, you know, cuckoo for coconuts over, maybe in December, was uh, using scales to check in on students. The Fauci scale, the cat, what cat are you today? Uh,
Sure.
in fact, just to let listeners know, I was so impressed with this because it was such a great way to check in with students, especially students on Zoom. I emailed Jess and I asked her permission. Can I please share this with not only my colleagues in my department, but as a department chair, my colleagues across 16 departments in my College of Arts and Sciences, which
Well, I hope that they got something out of it. I hope
I,
that helps them make those connections.
they did, and plus, I think instructors in other disciplines may not have the ease that we have in psychological science. A physics instructor might not know how to connect as easily at the beginning of a Zoom class to check in with how are you today. But I think those slides that you shared, how are you feeling on that Fauci scale? That's a lovely icebreaker at the beginning of a class. But it also asks, okay, how are you today? And you can use Zoom polling features to collect your attendance data. So I mean, it was just lovely. And so, thank you so much. And now I'm going to shut up and let you talk about how did you start it? Where'd you get the idea? Tell us about it.
So I came to Gannon in '09 and I had to teach stats, and it was like a brand new prep for me. And back then we were on SPSS, and I've always taught in a computer lab. And they had me teaching multiple sections, and it was a real struggle that first year, because I don't think you really understand statistics till you teach it yourself. Like you
I,
can think you understand it, and you could even get an A in your graduate level classes, but I don't think you really get it until you have to explain it to an 18-year-old. I think that's
oh,
entirely different,
I
right?
completely agree with you. Yes.
Yeah. And especially like back in the day, like I was like the brand new person on the schedule. So I was like trying to explain like the central limit theorem to like 19-year-olds at 8 o'clock in the morning. So it was a lot. Because I was teaching so many stats, it kind of became a chronically accessible goal. So I just started to see stats examples everywhere. And I saw these examples where they weren't saying that they used data, but they were talking about data in the popular press and here and there, and Time Magazine on NPR, things like that. And I started to compile them, I remember, in a Google document. And I was trying to figure out, oh, I can use headers and things like that. Then I realized that via the blog, which I didn't share initially, I can use the tagging feature in the blog in order to keep my examples straight, my ideas straight, so I can like find them later. And then at some point, I just decided that I could share the blog with everyone else, and I cleaned it up a little bit so it was ready for other people. Though I'm sure it's still written with typos, but I started to share it broadly, and it just really took off because stats is hard for everyone to teach, but it's so applicable to everyday life. But at the same time, like if you're too busy to look for all of these examples, I mean, I have a lot of users who have said, you know what, I needed to teach ANOVA in 20 minutes, and I just looked for ANOVA and I found an example I was able to integrate in like the 20 minutes I had before class. And that's been extremely rewarding to find this community, largely on Twitter, of people that have really benefited. And again, it's mostly stats, but I think like the Venn diagram for like stats and research methods overlap a lot, right? So it's a little research methods, and some of the examples are really specific to certain forms of psychology or branches of psychology. So I think people can get a lot of mileage off of it.
Well, just a couple of things. So first off, what you said at the very beginning, I agree completely. I, I don't think I really understood statistics until I had to explain it to undergraduates. In my very first job, I remember teaching chi-square on a chalkboard in a stats lab, and I kept getting questions and questions and questions. And I finally had to figure it out. And I had done undergrad, I'd gone to grad school, I'd gotten my PhD, I was in my first assistant professor job, and then I finally understood, I think, for the first time, oh, that's what a chi-square is. That's what that distribution means. It took me, I had that aha moment for myself, just like you described. And and Jess, you know, the thing that's so impressive about what you've done with the blog is that other stats instructors clearly see examples in life. They teach the class, thousands upon thousands of folks throughout the US teach psych stats class. They see the examples that you see and I see. Some of them might even collect them and keep track of them, but they don't take the time to share them. They don't take the time to curate a list, to distribute the list in a blog, to tag them and organize them. That's really the key difference and the amazing generosity that you exhibit, I think, pretty much weekly.
I try to do it weekly. Sometimes things get in the way, but my process that you're talking about, kind of alluding to, is I use Blogger, which I mostly just started using because I was already into the Google suite, and that plays well with Google. It's like owned by Google. I'm not sure exactly the nature of the relationship, but if I see something that strikes my fancy, I just like copy the news story and I paste it into a new blog post in Blogger, and then maybe in 3 weeks I'll get around to writing the blog post, depending on the time I have. But it's part of my workflow now that I need to, like, oh, I heard the story while my kids were talking on NPR. I need to remember that so I can like see if there's enough meat to that I can share it later.
But there's a lot of work. I mean, I think you see it. I'm guessing you see it as joy. I guess you see it as fun. I mean, some people collect stamps, some collect coins. You collect articles. You collect popular press things and graphics about stats. I mean, that you're kind of a collector, but you share your collection. Does your university, does your department see the value of this? In, like, for example, go ahead. Yeah.
No, you go ahead. Finish your question. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Like in your annual evaluation, I mean, this is what I would call a non-traditional form of scholarship. I mean,
yes. And I'm actually working on an article about how I sold it when I went up for associate professor.
Oh, good. So you had it in your dossier, and you got credit for it in some way, shape, or form.
Yes, but you have to. So Gannon has pretty specific language for what it takes to make rank and tenure. It's in our institutional policy manual. And basically, I just copy and pasted the whole manual and then like talked about, oh, you want this? Here's what I did. You want this? Here's what I did. I didn't want anyone to be challenged while evaluating my dossier and wonder where things fit. But this is kind of a weird thing to have fit, right? Like, it's kind of national service and it's a publication, but it's not exactly peer reviewed, but it's shared. And so what I did is I use data, surprise, in order to make my argument via Google Analytics. I was able to say it is international. People from all 50 states are using this, people from X number of countries. It's been viewed over 400,000 times. I can say, I'm just looking it up right now, I have published 444 pieces. Let's say each of those takes me an hour. I mean, this has been a considerable amount of effort that I've put in. Also, when I went up for tenure, I just made like a tweet asking, like, look, if you don't mind and if you have the time, could you write me a letter of recommendation based specifically on how you use this blog? And parts of those letters of recommendation went into my dossier. And that was nice because I could say, like, here's a high school teacher, here's a graduate professor, here's someone in Germany, here's a statistician, not a psychologist. I was able to kind of personalize it. And at my university, they kind of like those narrative pieces in order. And that's especially important because like there's non-psychologists evaluating me. So it's nice to be able to translate it, not just using numbers.
Well, we also know that qualitative data, those data are the testimonials are really persuasive.
They are. And the ones I kind of was able to demonstrate like the reach of the blog by like all of the different people that have been helped.
That is awesome. So a couple of years ago, and I haven't gotten around to writing it up, I did a study at Boise State of faculty where I mocked up a scenario. You have to go up for promotion and tenure. 5 publications are required. You
Mhm.
get 4, but now for the 5th one, you want to make a substitution. What would be acceptable? And I
Okay.
gave them a bunch of scenarios. A blog, but a blog with how many downloads, or a podcast with how many downloads, or you host a podcast with how many guests, or a Facebook post with how many likes. And so it's really interesting that, you mentioned bimodal earlier. The faculty in many ways are bimodal. Either some are nothing can substitute for the gold standard of a publication, and some are, yeah, you can actually have something that's non-traditional substitute, but the numbers are obnoxiously high. Like, yeah, you could have a Twitter account with a Twitter index or Twitter following, but you have to have a million likes. So
Sure.
some people are. I think people have to do what you did, which is you have to educate a committee.
Hmm.
People go, "Oh, you wrote a blog? That's I mean, anybody can write a blog. I mean, it's kind of like, well, you can put anything on Wikipedia, but what you did is you demonstrated, well, it took me an hour a week and I've written 444 of these. And oh, by the way, I can document with data from Google Analytics 400,000 reads. And your 400,000 reads are going to be more downloads and more reads than my entire career of anything I've ever written, published, books, journal articles, everything combined. I mean, that if you want to talk about the impact of a Gannon University faculty member, you've had more impact than probably anyone.
Thank you. That was well put. I wouldn't want to say it myself, but I mean, just think about how many times like your paper maybe's been cited, but it's like one little, like no one's read the article. Let's be honest. Like a lot of times,
Yes,
you
of course, let's
know,
be honest. Yes.
and
I
I just, it's harder to quantify because I don't get citations off of it. But if we just look at route numbers of people that have been influenced by my work and my ability to help the community, it helps to have those numbers. It absolutely helps to have the numbers and to frame it like, well, what about your citation index? Really, you've been cited 50 times. That's a pretty big deal to be cited 50 times.
Right, and there's the H index and there's the I index, and there's variations on that, and the Scopus thing and the Plum X thing. I mean, again, I'm slightly familiar with all of those, but how many times I've been cited, and let's be generous, even the amount of times people have downloaded something I've written and read it across everything is not going to be 400,000 people.
Right.
And here's the added thing that you did. Then you actually went out and sent a tweet and said, "Hey, if you have time, would you please send me a thing that says what the impact of my work was?" So in case someone on your committee said, "Well, yeah, that's the number of people who access the blog, but you don't know if you had any real impact," then you had testimonials from people in their own
Hmm.
words. So
Yes.
and you could probably put together, I don't know, 100, 500, 1,000 of those. Then your committee can't say, "Well, no one really read it. They clicked on it and they clicked away." Well, no, you've got testimonials from people who took time to write to you. I guess, and Jess, you already know this. I guess maybe it's for the listeners. I'm trying to make a point that these non-traditional things that you and our colleagues do, blogs and podcasts and Facebook posts and tweets that publicize research and teaching techniques, and you know the Facebook group that Molly Metz moderated and Anna Ropp moderated. These are really important services to the teaching of psychology.
Well, and another thing that I'm working on in this article that's slowly coming together is on the other side of it, if you don't create content, how can you convey that this is legit professional development? Like, I changed my office hours. I took them out of my office and I put them in the library at Gannon University pre-pandemic, to make them more student-centric, to get them out of my space and put it in a student space. Our library it was redone maybe 5 years ago. It's gorgeous. And I got that idea from VG Sathi at UNC, right? And I put that in my annual review. And I don't have professional development by going to conferences anymore. But I think if you change something substantial in the way you do what you do based on talking to an expert on Twitter, I think that you should absolutely cite that, not on your CV, but when you have your annual eval and they ask, well, how have you changed your teaching? I mean,
Right.
if you had gone to VG's talk about that at some conference, that would be a legitimate thing. Why not the tweet that doesn't require any jet fuel, that doesn't require any balancing of caregiving issues? That's going to be another part of the article of how we can better document our own professional development via tweets and Facebook and information and changes that we make on that sort of expertise we can gather.
I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, someone who reads your blog is getting the access to professional development resources for free.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest with you, that's the way Garth and I think about psych sessions. Someone who
Sure.
gets to listen to these interviews is getting access to professional development resources for free. And that's one of the reasons we think it's so valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you and I both know, many of our colleagues around the nation don't have the chance to travel to these conferences and to hear those
Exactly.
great speakers. And so if you can record them, or you can put ideas into print or on screen or an audio, it just serves a larger audience, and it assures them that they're available, hopefully in perpetuity.
Yes. And I think it really evens the playing field for people that don't have grant funding and don't have deep pockets in order to go on these trips, or people who have caregiving that can't. And I just, some of it, you just have to convince your committee of this and convince your committee that it is so. But I mean, like, I just did a talk at the STP portion, the pre-conference at SPSP. And I shared it on Twitter, and then I got a message, a DM in Twitter about someone that wanted more details so they could use it in their class. She hadn't attended the conference, but she had read my PowerPoints and she was going to fold it into her class. Is that any different than if she had gotten like the tenure points by going to some academic conference, learning about it, and then implementing it? I don't think it is, because the end result's the same thing, only she saved hours and hours and hours of her life.
Right. And she saved her university money by not traveling, and she saved carbon footprint.
See,
Now, yeah, the challenge, I think, though, is that many of our colleagues aren't as savvy as you are, technologically speaking, to be able to deliver that talk the way you did, and then to be able to let someone direct message you for you to be then, I'll tell you right now, first off, I've not been on Twitter for a while, but even when I was, handling direct messages was tricky to me.
Yeah.
So there is a technology learning curve for some faculty members. I would even say many faculty members. You're operating at a savvy level that's beyond many or most of us. So the things that you're doing that benefit so many of us, I look at people like you and Sue France and go that, and Anna Ropp, and go, wow, that's really cool. I wish I could do that. And I can dabble in some of those things, but I can't do all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what do you think are the remaining challenges?
Well, I'm writing a stats textbook now, so I'm taking the spirit of my blog, but also some big picture ideas on how I believe stats should be taught and what we should be focusing on. And I'm writing a book with Norton right now.
Okay. And are you running into I'm trying to figure out a nice way to say this. Are you running into challenges against the traditional publishing industry, I was going to call it the man. Is the man holding you down? They want you to do it a certain way, or are you able to have your voice that so many people are used to, or are you not far enough along in the draft yet that reviewers have seen it? Or
It's been out for review. The first 3 chapters went out for review. And some people hate it. Like, not many people, but some people are like, how dare you be funny? Like, it's more complicated than that. But I mean, I write with a warm tone, and a lot of people like that I write with the tone that my students are going to succeed. And here's some hints and ideas for succeeding. And I use a lot of these examples, and I'm throwing these examples in there that are modern. I hope they're still modern when they get published, about illustrating these different ideas and thinking about, like, man, like, just because we've been teaching stats a certain way for decades doesn't mean we should keep teaching it that way. Like, even little things like including, like, these form plots in the every stats book has a chapter on visualization. Well, visualization's changed radically in the last 5 years, and we need to keep up with that. So I talk about that some and things like that.
yeah, textbook writing is a funky business, and some adopters want it written formally, and they want it to be formal APA format and very stodgy and very but if you're writing for students, it's almost like are you writing it for the faculty member, or are you writing it for the student to be successful? And yet the faculty member controls adoptions. And so
Right.
it's oftentimes a very sticky wicket, because then the publisher gets panicky about, well, if too many faculty members say that they don't like it, then even though it might be great for students, we can't get faculty members to adopt it. It's a tricky area to navigate, that's for sure.
Well, I'm terribly fortunate that I am writing Beth Moreland's coattails. She's a Norton author, and she's been very successful with her research methods book that was very accessible to students. And a lot of that spirit and that idea and that concept of, like, don't want to, this is going to be insulting to someone, but almost like de-snobbing it and just making it more accessible to students. I've been encouraged on that front with my editor and my consulting editor. Yeah, my developmental editor, excuse me. So
Yeah, first off, I don't think that's insulting to anybody. And secondly, okay, so Jess, and I don't want to argue with you because I want to be polite. I don't think you're writing anybody's coattails. I really don't. I think you've done the work. I mean, unless Beth's writing it for you, you're not right. Seriously, you're not writing coattails. I mean,
maybe not that, but she's opened some doors to say, hey, y'all, look, you can write like this engaging, dare I say, fun textbook that students don't fall asleep reading.
absolutely
That piece of it, I would say she'd open doors about.
Yeah, she's encouraged you, maybe as a mentor, or maybe as
Mhm.
someone who's a role model, as she's a role model to many of us, including me. And I absolutely, but I don't know. I'm sorry. I heard a tinge of imposter syndrome in there, and I just don't think for me, I don't see it. You get to have your own opinions, but I just don't see it. So
Well, on that note, I've been blogging since 2012 about it, and I never thought someone would write the book that I wanted to write. I never thought someone would be able to take a chance on me and believe in me as to write a book that de-emphasized something that's a little controversial. I really don't emphasize calculating out test statistics as to use a table to find a p-value, because I think it's a misallocation of class time when p-values are what they are and how they're viewed right now. I don't think they're going away permanently, but they need to be augmented with effect sizes, right? And I think it's also really important to teach stats in such a way that students aren't hoodwinked by bad statistics and bad data in real life, and that they need to learn how to communicate statistics and how to read statistics. And my book really emphasizes that. It emphasizes interpreting p-values and effect sizes together, and also like writing up your data.
yeah, and I think Beth just published an article about that in TOP very recently about, it's more important to look at p hacking and things like that. And, plus with the replication crisis, we are looking at those things differently. And the other thing I think that's a piece of it that it's probably too nuanced for most. If we had the ability, we might teach stats differently for those who are going to graduate school and those who are going into the workforce.
Yes.
And maybe stats, but maybe even moreover research methods. I think if we were teaching stats for people going into the workforce, we would probably, if it were me, if I had my magic wand, and I'll give you your magic wand in a moment, I would teach stats for people going into the psychology workforce. I would use Microsoft Excel.
Amen. Yep.
And I would focus on pivot tables because I'm told by people in those industries, that's what they want their employees to be able to do. And for folks going into graduate school type paths, it would probably be more R these days than SPSS, even though I'm an SPSS old fogey. I'm told R it's what the new kids are doing.
It's what the new kids, it's what the popular kids are doing. Yeah,
It's all right. It's all the cool kids are
Mhm.
going out behind the football stand, and they're doing R.
With their hexagon stickers. Yeah.
That's right. But I don't think for many reasons, I don't think it's feasible to, separate, pathways. And then, maybe you could give people the options and they could self-select, but, plus I don't think we have expertise I'll just speak for my department. We don't have expertise in my department to be able to have instructors who could teach a deep dive in Microsoft Excel, but we do have that expertise to teach deep dive in SPSS.
Sure. So another project, Susan Noland is in charge of the STP this year, and she has a task force for the teaching of stats, and I'm the chair of that task force. And one of the subcommittees is looking at stats across the psych curriculum, and we're looking to generate some data and really look at this question of how do we train the 50% of psychology majors that don't get any advanced degrees and the 4% that get a PhD. Like, how do you serve them all so they can live their dreams? And I know, so hopefully we'll have some data forthcoming by the end of the year. But at my university, we teach JASP now because it is free and point and click. And if you can do SPSS, you can do JASP. And then we have a 1-credit lab that the majors have to take where they learn R. And we have an advanced psychometrics class. We have a multivariate stats class that's taught in R. And we have regular research methods and advanced research methods that both require students to analyze their data. We also have a BS and a BA. And if you get the BS, you have to minor, I think it's either biochemistry, mathematics, or statistics. So that's how we've handled our curriculum, that we've made enough branches. And that was hard to do. I mean, we're at this itty bitty liberal arts university. I mean, it's probably easier to do at a large university where you have other experts and other like larger pools of different people doing different things across campus that you can tap into. And we have some of that certainly. But that's how we've handled it here, because that's something I think about a lot. If you look at some of the APA workforce data, you're not teaching the next stats superstar. The chances of that are exceedingly low. So why are you teaching someone who's going to get their amazing K-CREP certification and be an amazing therapist and make the world better? They don't need to learn R. They need to learn enough for their continuing education credits. They need to learn enough that maybe they're going to help someone else with their research. They need to know a t-test from an ANOVA, from regression, but I'm just not convinced that we're serving our students the best in giving them what they're going to use by teaching them this really, really high level stuff while ignoring, like, the one thing that always gets me is a lot of stats books have like a dedicated chapter on probability or a large section of probability. Mm-hmm. But if you ask me, they don't really need to know a ton of probability for stats, but they're not learning about absolute versus relative frequency and probability and how that's used to manipulate news lines. And frankly, the students are going to have to deal with making sense of absolute versus relative risk a lot more often than they're going to have to think of A but B but not C probability or something like that.
Right.
I just think a lot about what they're going to see in real life.
Yeah, understanding Bayes' theorem and base rates, would probably be more valuable than laws of transitivity.
Right, exactly.
How in the world at a small school can you teach all those advanced classes?
We have lots of big stats nerds up in her. It helps out. So
I guess
across the
so.
board,
So
yeah. So, and it's also complicated because psych stats counts as stats across the university. So we have students, like I mentioned previously, from all over the place. Our little department of 3,000, or our university of 3,000, we probably teach like 6 psych stats sections a semester.
so you just mentioned a whole boatload of classes
A boatload of stuff, yeah.
that most undergraduate, I'm going to go out on a limb. I know a little bit about the psychology curriculum nationally. Most undergraduate departments don't have those psych specialty and research method specialty courses that you mentioned. I- If oh, this is awkward. If you were to depart Gannon,
Mhm.
how many of those classes would go away?
So I only teach a ton of psych stats, actually. Andrew Caswell, who's my next door neighbor over here, he teaches our psychometrics class. And Luke Rosiel, who's our chair, teaches the advanced stats, the multivariate stats. And Luke and John Ranney teach our research methods classes.
But you weren't instrumental in getting all of those into the curriculum?
I helped where I could. We had
Okay.
a lot of long conversations, and the creation of the BA and the BS happened maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and there's a lot of conversations about what do we need to give students pursuing a BS, presumably so they can go to a more quantity program later on.
So you're not the lone voice in the rigor of stats and research methods that you're in your department. It sounds like it's well represented and well rounded.
It is, especially for like, we aren't a research focused institution, but via hiring the last couple years, we just have a lot of people that are really good at stats, and we're fortunate in that.
You may say that you're not research focused, but the litany of courses you just mentioned sounds like you are.
Well, let me say, for the faculty, there's such a heavy emphasis on our teaching. We're certainly
Okay.
keeping up with the research.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Wow. That is impressive. So Jess, I know we're coming up on an hour and I don't want to keep you too overly long. Were there any things that you thought we were going to talk about or you wanted to mention? You mentioned the task force that you're on this year. You mentioned the book that you're working on. Any other things that are kind of exciting that you wanted to mention, or anything that's bugging you that you wanted to vent about, or anything on your radar screen?
Well, if I can actually say thank you. You selected me to speak at APS in DC a couple years ago.
You're welcome. And thank you for saying yes.
And out of that came the book, because I was able to meet with my editor at Norton, and we were able to actually like sit down. And I remember I had like this 3-hour dinner where we just talked about the teaching of stats, and then we had breakfast the next day. So that really was the impetus for me to have FaceTime and get that book off the ground and really talk about what I wanted to do and why it was different.
Well, and again, it's you kind of never know
Right.
what good things might happen when you say yes. And we all have to say no to some things, and just because of scheduling or commitments. But you go give a talk, or you give a talk on Twitter, or you give a poster, and someone comes by and mentions something, and a year later they remember that, and you're asked to review something, and a couple years later you're asked to write something, and good for you that you leveraged that, and you took
What you're
advantage of
saying
it.
is the truth. You never know what it is that's going to be like the offer of a lifetime, just like happening without even realizing it. And it's also interesting just to say, like, word to the wise, like, by having the blog and stuff, I've kind of made myself more public than other people have. And by the
Yes.
time I talked to Sherry at Norton, she had read my blog. She and the Norton people had looked me up, like, understandably so. Like, they don't want to make a bad bet on someone that's clearly not representing themselves in a way that's professional or what have you. So that's the other thought. Like, if your university has you do like a little 1-minute video about your research, you never know when you're being vetted based on that stuff. You never know, like, it just amazed me. And then at that point, I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I was talking to a few other publishers, and they had all seen my Welcome to Gannon video. They had all seen the blog. They had seen the freely accessible, like, book chapters I had written at that point. Like, you just never know when you're being vetted, and you never know when an opportunity is coming either.
Just remind me again, when did you start the blog?
2012.
So in 2012, when you started the blog, I would suspect that in your mind, it wasn't the idea, I'm going to start this blog so I can get a book deal.
I need a personal brand. Did they have personal brands in 2012? I don't think so.
They did, but psychologists weren't thinking about it, right?
No,
Psychology
definitely not.
yeah. So you didn't start that. You've actually described for our listeners. You were organizing your own thoughts, and you thought, if I clean this up a little bit, I could share it and tag it, and other people might benefit from it. But the benefit of that was, 7 or 8 years later, you've got a history of your writing, of productivity, and you know what? When you have established that, gosh, would a publisher be interested in someone who has an established brand of followers? And
Right.
if she were to publish a book, might there be people already lined up to buy the first edition of that book? Might
Right.
that be a good risk? It might be. I mean, it's you didn't start it for that reason. You weren't thinking that far ahead, but all that work for a whole different reason turned out to be beneficial for really good reasons.
It has been. And I still get such a thrill whenever someone says that they used one of my ideas, or they ask me like for a little more information on an idea. I love it at the individual level. And that's part of why the book is so exciting to me, where I can help people at a much larger level now.
Yeah, that is very gracious that you see that helping, that helping behavior. It's very generous of you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to continue that theme. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for all that you've given. Thank you for coming out to APS when I asked you.
Yes.
I have a lot of appreciation for what you've shared with the discipline and for me and with me. So Jess, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, it was great to talk. I really enjoyed it. Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. I'm going to give you the last word. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention?
No, now I feel all this pressure to be insightful, and I got nothing.
Oh, you've already been. Trust me, you've already been. I just want to make sure that I didn't skip anything that
No,
you wanted
you
to
hit a lot
chat
of the big
about.
stuff I'm involved with right now, that's for sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.